Nearly 5 years later, the case took an unexpected and dramatic turn. In 2012, a hiker was making his way through a remote, rugged mountainside near the town of Delta when he noticed something strange hidden among the rocks and dry underbrush. At first glance, he assumed it was just a pile of discarded debris or trash left behind by someone. But as he got closer, he realized with a shock that what he had discovered was human. Disturbed and alarmed, the hiker immediately contacted the local authorities. Law enforcement responded swiftly, and forensic specialists were brought in to examine the scene. After conducting a series of careful and detailed forensic tests, investigators were able to confirm what many had feared. It was Paige Bergfeld. Paige Bergfeld entered the world on April 27, 1973, in the warm, bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia. She was the second-born child in a hard-working immigrant family who had journeyed all the way from the Mariana Islands to seek a better life in the United States. Her parents, Suzanne and Frank Bergfeld, had carried with them generations of cultural values, resilience, and a strong commitment to family. From a young age, Paige displayed an extraordinary sense of empathy and a natural inclination toward helping others. Whether it was bandaging a friend's scraped knee during recess or comforting a classmate going through a tough time, she was always the one others turned to for support. Determined to turn her passion into a lifelong vocation, Paige enrolled in the nursing program at the University of Florida. College life marked a transformative chapter for her. Far from home for the first time, she adapted quickly, building strong friendships and throwing herself into her studies with characteristic enthusiasm. It was during these years that she met Howard Beegler, a fellow student with a magnetic charm and a genuine interest in healthcare. Their connection was instant. Upon completing her nursing degree, Paige made the decision to return to Colorado, where her parents had relocated. Though they had graduated and were living apart, she and Howard stayed in constant contact. Their bond remained unshaken by the distance. Then, in 1995, just a year after Paige returned home, she and Howard were married in an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. However, as the months went by, a profound difference between them began to surface. While Paige dreamed of one day becoming a mother and creating a large, loving family, Howard had a different vision for the future, one that did not include children. After nearly 2 years of contemplation, heart-to-heart conversations, and emotional soul-searching, Paige and Howard came to a painful but mutual decision. In 1997, they officially parted ways. Following this major life change, Paige found herself standing at a personal and professional crossroads. Seeking financial stability and a new beginning, she began working at a prominent Denver nightlife venue. Wanting to maintain privacy and separate her personal identity from her professional role, she adopted the pseudonym Madison. While the environment was vastly different from the medical world she had come from, Paige approached it with the same professionalism, charisma, and resilience that had always defined her. It was during this time that Paige crossed paths with Rob Dixon, a confident and charismatic entrepreneur whose family owned a successful regional business empire. The chemistry between them was undeniable. What started as friendly conversations quickly developed into a passionate romance that swept them both off their feet. Within a year of meeting, in 1998, Paige and Rob were married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. Together, they moved into a spacious, upscale home nestled in the picturesque suburbs of Colorado. Over the next few years, she gave birth to 3 children. She embraced motherhood with all her energy, becoming not just a devoted parent, but the emotional anchor of the entire household. By 2001, Paige's life appeared to be everything she had once longed for: a loving husband, 3 beautiful children, and a home filled with laughter. But as the years went on, unseen cracks began to form beneath the surface. Rob's business ventures, once thriving and full of promise, began to falter. A series of financial setbacks took a toll on the Dixon family's fortune. What started as minor concerns turned into severe financial distress. Eventually, the situation became untenable, and Rob filed for bankruptcy. By 2004, the strain had reached its peak. The couple's relationship, once passionate and supportive, had become fraught with conflict. One evening, during a particularly intense dispute, Paige reached a breaking point. In a state of fear and emotional distress, she picked up the phone and called emergency services. Her voice, trembling with emotion, conveyed both fear and concern. She reported that Rob had used threatening language during the argument, remarks that deeply unsettled her and left her worried for the safety of their children. It wasn't a call made in haste, but one born from genuine fear for the well-being of those she loved most. Several officers from the local police department arrived at the Dixon residence without delay, fully prepared to intervene and ensure the safety of both the woman and her children. However, when officers reached the residence, they encountered an unexpected scene. Standing at the front door were Paige and Rob, side by side. Their expressions were calm, perhaps overly so, as if rehearsed. Paige stepped forward and politely informed the officers that everything was under control. She claimed the disagreement had been resolved and that there was no longer any reason for concern. With no visible signs of harm and no legal grounds to press further, the officers had no choice but to leave. Approximately 1 year later, in a far more urgent and emotionally charged state, Paige made another call to the police, this time reporting something much more serious. According to her statement, an altercation had taken place between her and Rob. Paige said the confrontation occurred while she was holding their youngest child in her arms. The report described Rob displaying sudden aggression, behavior that crossed a dangerous line. Rob was brought in for questioning and subsequently charged with third-degree assault. As the legal process moved forward, he eventually agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt to one of the lesser counts in exchange for avoiding a more severe sentence. The case was closed, and Rob did not serve time behind bars, but the impact of the situation lingered long after the court's decision. The relationship, once fueled by love and ambition, had devolved into a constant stream of tension, arguments, and emotional strain. Eventually, it became undeniable. Their relationship was no longer sustainable. Recognizing that it would be healthier for both themselves and their children to go their separate ways, Paige and Rob decided to finalize their separation. With quiet determination, Paige balanced parenting, work, and the ongoing stress of rebuilding her life. She remained deeply devoted to her children, making sure their daily routines remained stable and loving, despite the emotional challenges. Then came June 28, 2007. On what initially seemed like a typical summer day, Paige left her children in the trusted care of her close friend Carol. Carol, who often worked part-time as a nanny, had long been a reliable figure in the family's life. Paige had some errands to run and promised to be back soon. Those who knew her well consistently described her as punctual, responsible, and meticulous, especially when it came to her kids. So when the hours passed and Paige neither returned home nor responded to calls, a sense of unease quickly settled in. At first, everyone hoped there had simply been a delay, but as Friday turned into Saturday and still there was no word from Paige, the concern grew into alarm. It was Paige's young daughter, 8-year-old Jess, who took the first real step toward action. With a maturity well beyond her years, Jess insisted on going to the local police station. Accompanied by Carol, the girl reported her mother missing. Soon, a large-scale search was launched. On Sunday, July 1st, 2007, just days after Paige vanished, a red Ford Focus was discovered parked in an unfamiliar area. It was immediately identified as belonging to Paige. Even more disturbing, the vehicle was in flames. Firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, but it was already too late. The car was heavily damaged, and hopes of finding Paige inside, or any straightforward clue, were dashed. What raised immediate suspicions was the nature of the fire. The area surrounding the vehicle showed no signs of other ignition sources. The damage was isolated exclusively to the car. The district attorney took particular interest in this detail. He publicly stated that the fire appeared to be intentional and not the result of any accident. Even worse, the district attorney did not rule out the possibility that she may have already lost her life. Forensic teams combed through the remains of the vehicle, examining every scorched surface for clues. They looked for anything: a fingerprint, a fiber, a trace of fuel that might explain what had happened to Paige or where she had gone in those final hours. Sheriff later provided a crucial insight into one of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation. According to him, setting a vehicle on fire is a tactic that is sadly not uncommon in serious criminal cases. Arson is often used not just to destroy property, but to eliminate potential evidence. evidence that might otherwise offer critical leads. In Page's case, it was clear that someone wanted to make sure no such evidence remained. Despite the extent of the damage caused by the flames, forensic specialists were still able to extract valuable clues from what remained of the car. During the investigation, one small but telling detail stood out. The driver's seat had been adjusted all the way back. This seemingly minor observation turned out to be quite revealing. The settings suggested that the last person to operate the vehicle was likely taller than Page, who stood at an average height. It strongly indicated that someone else had most likely been driving her car before it was abandoned and set ablaze. Investigators found that specific pages were missing from Page's personal planner or notebook, those corresponding to the dates between June 26th and June 29th. These were precisely the days surrounding her disappearance. While the physical search pressed on, the police also launched a parallel investigation into the people closest to Page. Their goal was to reconstruct her recent movements, conversations, and state of mind leading up to the day she vanished. Naturally, her ex-husband Rob was high on their list. At the time, Rob was living in Pennsylvania, far from Colorado, but due to their volatile history, including the two previously filed domestic incident reports during their marriage, investigators knew they couldn't overlook him. During questioning, the detectives focused on establishing a clear timeline. They wanted to know exactly when Rob had last traveled to Colorado, whether he had any recent contact with Page, and whether anyone could verify his whereabouts. Rob firmly maintained that he had been at his home in Pennsylvania on the day Page disappeared. He emphasized that he had nothing to do with her vanishing and had no reason to wish her harm. After the interview, Rob surprised some observers by becoming actively involved in the search efforts. His behavior gave the impression of someone genuinely concerned, although opinions about his motives remained divided among the public. Meanwhile, attention also turned to another figure from Page's past, her first husband, Howard. Interestingly, after her split from Rob, Page had rekindled communication with Howard. Howard revealed that he had seen Page shortly before she vanished. According to his statement on June 28th, the very day Page disappeared, the two had met in Eagle County, a location that was roughly halfway between their respective homes. Howard explained that the meeting was business-related, though it also gave them an opportunity to catch up in person. After spending a portion of the day together, the two parted ways, and according to Howard, they continued to talk via phone after the meeting. When he later learned of Page's disappearance, Howard said he didn't hesitate. He contacted emergency services immediately. He expressed a firm belief that Page would never have simply vanished, and especially not without contacting her children. Cell tower data showed that Howard's phone had indeed been in the Denver area that day, several hours away from the site where Page was last seen. That verification allowed investigators to confidently rule him out as a suspect. Only a few days after the shocking discovery of Page's burning car, a new and unexpected lead emerged, this time purely by chance. A motorist had pulled over to the side of a highway southeast of the city to fix a flat tire. As he stepped out of his vehicle, something caught his eye in the grass, a checkbook lying half buried near the edge of the road. Curious and sensing that it might be something important, the man immediately contacted local authorities. Scattered in the nearby brush and along the roadside were several of Page's personal effects. Among them were her medical records, insurance documents, and other items tied directly to her. The presence of these belongings, miles away from the original crime scene, suggested that someone had gone to considerable effort to disperse her possessions, either to mislead investigators or perhaps, as some speculated, to send a message. Sheriffs later remarked that some pages from the checkbook had been torn out, mirroring the earlier discovery of missing pages from Page's planner. The small but revealing discovery of a business card lying along a rural stretch of highway would ultimately turn out to be the key that unlocked an entirely new and unexpected chapter in the mysterious case of Page's disappearance. The card featured the name Carrie, a name that meant nothing to detectives at the time, but a few calls and cross-references quickly confirmed what no one had imagined. Carrie was a name used by Page herself. This startling revelation opened up a side of her life that no one, not even her closest friends or family, had known existed. Further investigation revealed that Page had a second phone, completely separate from her personal and family communications. This phone, investigators soon realized, was used exclusively for matters related to her second identity and the secret work she conducted under the alias. With access to that phone, detectives obtained call logs that offered a glimpse into her last known interactions before vanishing. The final outgoing call from that device was made on the evening of June 28th at approximately 9 p.m., just hours before Paige was reported missing. Based on the contacts listed in her call history, police began to assemble a list of individuals who may have had some connection to Paige's disappearance. 7 names quickly stood out as potentially relevant, and investigators started the process of interviewing each person. Among those names was one that drew immediate and heightened attention: Lester. Lester had a documented criminal history, and his past included a felony conviction that had resulted in a 5-year prison sentence. Though the specific nature of his earlier offense was not initially disclosed, it was enough to raise red flags. In addition to his background, Lester's physical characteristics and behaviors began to line up in troubling ways with earlier accounts shared by people who knew Paige. One particularly concerning piece of information came from Carol Lindholm, Paige's longtime friend and trusted nanny. Carol recalled a disturbing story that Paige had once shared with her. On that occasion, Paige had been leaving her office building late in the day. As she walked toward her Ford vehicle in the parking lot, she noticed an unfamiliar white car parked directly behind it, effectively blocking her exit. Paige, frustrated but determined, got into her car, maneuvered out of the tight spot, and in the process slightly tapped the other vehicle. Rather than address the situation, the unknown driver fled the scene without a word, leaving Paige shaken and confused. But now that same white car had resurfaced as a potential clue, particularly because Lester was known to drive a similar vehicle. They began to explore the theory that Lester, perhaps obsessed with Paige. To better understand the nature of their connection, police thoroughly examined Paige's call records and client logs. It turned out that 55-year-old Lester worked as a mechanic, specializing in the repair and maintenance of recreational vehicles. Paige had been introduced to him through her secondary line of work. His behavior had reportedly made her uncomfortable, so she asked Carol, who occasionally provided services for clients, to meet with him. Carol initially hesitated, but eventually, perhaps to help her friend or out of concern, she agreed and went in Paige's place. As detectives delved deeper into Lester's background and routines, they uncovered a detail that sent a chill through the investigative team. Lester's repair shop was located almost directly across the street from the remote location where Paige's burned car had been discovered. Lester was brought in for another round of questioning. He willingly agreed to speak with detectives, appeared cooperative, and did not request legal representation. On July 5, 2007, he sat for a detailed interview at the sheriff's office. Throughout the session, Lester answered each question calmly and denied having any knowledge of Paige's disappearance. He maintained a friendly tone and even volunteered to provide his fingerprints and a DNA sample, which he claimed would prove his innocence. But one detail stood out to investigators, and it wasn't something Lester said. It was his height. When compared with the position of the driver's seat in Paige's Ford, the seat that had been pushed all the way back, Lester's tall stature was a perfect match. Eventually, detectives obtained a warrant to search Lester's home and workplace. What they found during that search only deepened their concerns. Among the items recovered was a disposable, unregistered mobile phone, commonly referred to as a burner phone. Records showed that multiple attempts to contact Paige had been made from this phone on the day she vanished. When confronted with the phone and its activity, Lester flatly denied ever owning such a device. However, the evidence was building. Investigators examined the packaging found in Lester's residence and traced it to a specific supermarket on North Avenue. From there, they reviewed surveillance footage from the store's security cameras. What they saw left little room for doubt. Lester was captured on video purchasing a disposable phone, matching the one recovered in his home, just days before Paige's disappearance. Despite the clarity of the images and the fact that the timeline aligned perfectly, he continued to deny any involvement or knowledge. His unwillingness to admit what was plainly visible to everyone else only increased the pressure surrounding him. With mounting circumstantial evidence, growing inconsistencies in his statements, and a series of connections too strong to dismiss, Lester became the central figure in a case. With the case stalled and leads thinning out, Authorities hoped that a trained service dog might be able to uncover new clues, or at the very least confirm existing suspicions. The results were both revealing and unsettling. The dog responded immediately upon entering the vehicle. Investigators interpreted this as further confirmation that Paige had likely been in the car during or shortly before it was set on fire. But that wasn't all. The dog also reacted to another scent inside the vehicle, a scent it later matched to Lester. If accurate, it meant that Lester had been inside the car at some point, either before or after it had been torched. However, despite this development, the case was still lacking what prosecutors call direct evidence. While the clues were mounting, none of it, on its own, was definitive. There were no eyewitnesses placing Lester at the scene of a crime, no surveillance footage of the act itself, and most critically, no body to confirm that a murder had even taken place. All the evidence, as compelling as it seemed, remained circumstantial. One of the lead investigators on the case later expressed his frustration in an interview. Without a confirmed cause of death or a recovered body, the burden of proof was simply too high. As a result, no formal charges were filed. The case was reluctantly shelved. For several years, the investigation languished in limbo. Detectives continued to follow up on tips, and Paige's family clung to hope. Her loved ones, especially her children, were left without answers or closure, navigating a life filled with uncertainty and grief. Then, in an unexpected turn of events nearly 5 years later, the mystery took a major shift. In 2012, a hiker exploring a remote mountainside near the town of Delta stumbled upon something unusual among the rocks and dry brush. At first, he thought it was just discarded trash, but upon closer inspection, he realized he had found human. Alarmed, he quickly contacted local authorities. The area where the remains were found was particularly notable. It was not far from the road where Paige's personal belongings, including her checkbook, medical documents, and other items, had been discovered years earlier. Forensic teams were dispatched immediately. Suspicions were confirmed after a series of meticulous forensic tests. It was Paige. Lester wasn't arrested immediately. It would take another 2 years of careful preparation, new analysis, and strategic legal planning before charges were officially filed. In November 2014, Lester was formally arrested and charged with kidnapping, first-degree premeditated homicide, and second-degree murder. The charges represented years of work and a renewed commitment to securing justice. But the legal process was far from over. It wasn't until July 2016 that the trial finally began. The prosecution alleged that Lester's motive stemmed from a toxic mix of entitlement, obsession, and anger. According to them, Lester had become upset after being unable to schedule a follow-up appointment with Paige. One of the key witnesses during the trial was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa, who testified to his past behavior and volatile temperament. She described an earlier incident that revealed Lester's capacity for retaliation. According to Lisa, after their relationship ended, Lester had not accepted her decision to move on. He tracked her and her new partner down, confronted them aggressively, and eventually assaulted her. She was able to escape and filed a report with local authorities. One final piece of testimony came from Lester's current wife, who also took the stand. Initially, it was believed she might offer an alibi, but her testimony took an unexpected turn. When prosecutors showed her the surveillance footage from the supermarket where the disposable phone had been purchased, the same phone that was later linked to Lester's attempts to contact Paige, she identified her husband in the video, though Lester had denied being the person captured on the security cameras. His own wife recognized him. On September 9, 2016, after weeks of tense courtroom proceedings, impassioned testimonies, and meticulous presentations of evidence, the jury in the case against Lester returned to the courtroom without a consensus. Despite the time and effort invested in the trial, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. As a result, the presiding judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial, a legal outcome that, while not an acquittal, meant the trial had effectively ended without resolution. Over the next several weeks, the prosecution team took a fresh look at the entire case file. They revisited every detail, every interview, every piece of surveillance footage, every technical report. The goal was to ensure that no aspect of the case had been overlooked, and that the second trial would be even more compelling than the first. On November 21, 2016, Lester once again stood before a judge and jury to face the charges brought against him. The video, captured by cameras near the RV repair shop where Lester worked, showed a white Chevrolet vehicle circling the area where Paige regularly parked her car. The white vehicle, investigators confirmed, was registered to Lester's wife, who notably had been out of town during that period. Prosecutors argued that this allowed Lester to use the car without raising suspicion. One particularly telling moment of the trial came when new testimony was introduced regarding the night Paige went missing. According to his wife's statement, Lester left their home for approximately an hour that evening. When asked about it later, he claimed that he had forgotten to turn off the lights at his workshop and had driven back to check. But the timing of his unexplained absence aligned almost precisely with the suspected time frame of Paige's disappearance, further deepening investigators' concerns. On December 2, 2016, the courtroom heard the final statements from the prosecution and defense, each urging the jury to weigh the evidence carefully and to consider the consequences of their decision. Weeks later, on December 27, just as the year was drawing to a close, the verdict was announced. Lester was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other related charges in connection to Paige's death. Though Lester continued to deny any involvement, never admitting guilt or explaining his actions, the sentence was clear and unambiguous. The judge, emphasizing the severity of the crime and its lasting impact on the victim's loved ones, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Still, Lester chose to file an appeal, asserting that legal errors had occurred during the trial and that the verdict should be reconsidered. In June 2022, the appellate court issued its ruling. The three-judge panel upheld the original verdict, stating that the trial had been conducted fairly and that the evidence presented was sufficient to support the jury's decision.